Let's move to our next panel, Resilient Subsea Infrastructure for Underserved Regions. Please welcome Mr. Aliou Youssouf Aboki, Executive Secretary of WATRA, who will moderate this fourth panel. A big round of applause for Mr. Aboki, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. May I invite the panelists, please, to the floor before I introduce them one after the other, please. So, good afternoon, distinguished colleagues, panelists, and guests. Submarine cables are critical infrastructure for the global digital economy. Yet, in many underserved regions, the economic viability of submarine cable is as salient as physical risks. More attention has to be paid to how it can be delivered in a way that is economically viable and resilient over time, and hence attractive to long-term capital. This panel is therefore focused on two closely linked questions: how we make the economic case for submarine cables in these markets, and how we identify the opportunities, resources, and partnerships required to support resilient economy. Resilient here is not an abstract technical concept. It affects risk premiums, repair times, insurance costs, service continuity, and ultimately whether projects reach financial close. In underserved regions, resilience is often the difference between a cable being built and not being built. Our panel brings together development finance institutions, governments, regulators, regional and international bodies that collectively shape that equation. I will guide the discussion from the financing and investment rationale through policy and regulatory enablers, and finally to the partnerships required to deliver resilient connectivity at scale. It is now my honor to introduce our distinguished panelists, starting with the World Bank Group on my left, Mr. Herman Cufré, Global Manager of Digital Access at the World Bank Group, and serves as the alternate co-facilitator for Working Group 3. Round of applause, please. Mr. Rudra Narayan Palai, Member Technology Digital Communications Commission of the Department of Telecommunications, Ministry of Communications, Government of India. Next, Mr. Rodney Taylor, the Secretary General of the Caribbean Telecommunications Union, and serves as the co-facilitator for the Working Group 3. Next, Professor Manuel Cabugueira, a board member of our host Anacom, Portugal. Then Mr.Syed Mohammad Jawaid, a senior ICT specialist at the Islamic Development Bank. And finally, Ms. Lauren Bienek, Program Officer, Development Finance at the ITU. So panelists, we have about 75 minutes and 3 rounds of questions. Rounds 1 and 2 give each panelist 5 minutes or less for an individual question. We'll have a common question, 3 minutes each. We'll finish with a 10-minute audience Q&A. I'll be managing the clock closely and bridging your insights just to ensure that we have a focused discussion and time and very fast-paced. So I'll start with the World Bank Group. Mr. Cufré, the World Bank Group plays an active role in financing submarine cable systems worldwide, particularly in support of developing countries. How do you work with your member governments and industry partners to promote resilience and security of this infrastructure?
Yes, thank you. Hi, very good to see you after that massive lunch. So thank you for continuing being engaged on this event. I think to these questions, there are things that the World Bank Group does that are consistent with industry standards, so that we don't do anything from what's best practice from a perspective of resilience. That includes building from a design stage, supported by private sector consultants, the diversification of these routes, so that they are not just single spurs, but rather multi-landing point, multi-branching, ability to branch things going forward, and also establishing cross-island links. So there's nothing that the bank does that is unique in that regard, nor there is nothing that the bank does that is unique in terms of climate mitigation. 100% of our transactions since the Paris Agreement have to be compliant with climate resilience. So we build projections for climate change, for erosion, increasing in water levels, seismic activities in markets that are more or less prone to that. And we embed all of this in our thinking, much like every other cable that is being deployed. What is unique about the World Bank is our approach vis-a-vis the governments and our approach vis-a-vis our partners. For one, every single investment that we do has to have at its core a wholesale open access mandate. Even when we deploy or support consortium-based models, there has to be a wholesale open access component so that this submarine cable is not captive to any single operator. And examples has been, even in consortium-based models, we have financed the largest minority shareholder through an SPV that will be a wholesale open access provider, like the WIOC in vis-a-vis the EASY cable in East Africa, to preserve wholesale open access and the idea of non-discriminatory access to the networks. The other thing that we do is that we look beyond the submarine connectivity. We have a unique ability, because the governments are our shareholders, to not only look at the submarine cable, but also look at the backhauling, data center requirements, rural connectivity gaps, and take a view on what type of connectivity that submarine cable can enable. And the final thing that we do, and I'll stop here, is that we use these opportunities to engage with governments, which are our shareholders, to secure against lending programs, different reforms on the policy side, on the regulatory side, to promote some of these values of wholesale open access, infrastructure, etc. So many times our loans, or on the IFC side, our equity, or also loans to the private sector, always carry these asks in terms of enhancing wholesale open access connectivity. And those three things are not unique to the World Bank. I think all the DFIs we partner in this type of engagements, but certainly something that is very dear to our hearts. I'll stop here.
Thank you. You just framed the resilience as something that directly affects risk and costs, really, not just technical performance. I think, as a matter of fact, the outages in West Africa in 2024 shows that a single incident really can cause huge economic impact. So there is a lot that's got to do, that's behind that resilience. And I think this brings me to the role of policy, really, in shaping risk mitigation. I would like to now ask Mr. Palai, from the Governor of India. In 2023, India launched a consultation process that resulted in recommendations to improve submarine cable resilience and adoption of many ICPC recommendations. Which of these recommendations have already been implemented and which remain under consideration?
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon and namaskar. So I'll just, before touching the questions, I'll visit the historical perspective between India and Portugal. 5 centuries ago, a person, the name that Vasco da Gama, started his sea route or voyage and discovered India in 1498. And this year, 2026, India signed the exclusive FTA agreement with European Commission, where Portugal is allowed to have the export of this technical expertise, engineering, and thanks to the chairwoman Anacom for giving a good hospitality and reminds us about the relations between two countries. Thank you. With this, let me delve into the questions. So, ICPC, actually, the recommendations are persuasive in nature. And the national governments, they adapt. And as far as India is concerned, we have a regulator, Telecommunications regulator of TRAI, Authority of India. And 2023, it has floated a consultation paper, and where we have also adopted the various recommendations of or suggestions by the ICPC. And few of the things I would just like to highlight. One is that adoption of this ICPC made few recommendations. These are adopted. There are three major recommendations that are made on the consultation that paper floated by the TRI. First is the important submarine cable in infrastructure and owner and operators' reliance on the open regulatory regime. Number two, ICPC suggested that transparent and efficient permitting process, not protectionist ownership requirement to be ensured. Third, create expedient permitting regime and increase the attractiveness of India as a cable landing destination. These are the cardinal principles on which the recommendations the TRI has made for the recommendations. And the TRI came out with the further recommendations to the government that policy interactions allowing domestic submarine cable. It was not allowed. So submarine cable, so there is opportunity for the investment in this, developing indigenous cable capabilities and that repair and also laying capabilities, streamlining of permits and rationalizations of the ease of doing business, and protection of submarine cables. These are the very strong recommendations TRI has proposed, and fully it is acknowledged that the submarine cable is a critical infrastructure, and this government has also declared these cable landing stations or submarine cable are the critical infrastructures under the law. And pre-repair means that pre-repair clearances on request basis that has to be reduced within 7 days. And these are the recommendations that made by this TRI, which this government is working to allow. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Palai, for highlighting the policy choices of India, really how it shapes the investment environment. We'll now let's look at the regional perspective when it comes to resilience. And I'd like to ask Secretary General Taylor a question. The CTU comprises 21 member states and associate members, many of whom are small island development states, the SIDs. From the Caribbean perspective, what policy, regulatory, and fiscal incentives can be or are being used by Caribbean administrations to attract new submarine cable landings and more geographically diverse routes? And what role do intergovernment organizations as CTU, such as CTU, play in scaling good practices? Mr. Taylor.
Thank you very much, Aliyu, for the question. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining this afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here to speak In part, on behalf of small island developing states, as mentioned, the CTO represents 21 countries in the Caribbean. While we call them island states, it includes countries like Belize and Guyana, and most recently, French Guyana on the South American continent. I wish I could say that there are a ton of policy incentives being offered in the Caribbean. Unfortunately, they're not. And in fact, the majority of our cable systems in the Caribbean are between 20 and 30 years old, and they're approaching end of life. Now, the operators will say that's not really a problem. It's end of commercial life. It's not end of technical life. I'm sure we can get another 10 or 15 years out of them. And maybe they're right. But the reality is that it is a concern for us, given the age and also the diversity of routes within the region. Yes, most of our cables actually go to North America, the Nap of the Americas in Florida. There is some diversity going to South America as well, and very recently with French Guyana, with the Ella Link coming right here to Portugal, actually. But there's a need to focus on that. And initiatives such as this, the IAB, facilitated by the ITU and ICPC, go a long way in helping us to focus attention on these critical pieces of infrastructure. And so our governments are starting to pay more attention ever since this initiative. Even the CTU has been having conversations with the operators, with regulators, and policymakers with a view to incentivizing new investments in this area. Most recently, though, having said that, it's not all in gloom and doom. There is very recently a cable commission, CELIA, the Caribbean Elite Alliance, and that's being funded, well, it's connecting a number of countries in the Caribbean, Aruba, Martinique, Antigua, Puerto Rico, Curacao, and that connects again to Florida. That's a $15 million investment. It was actually funded by the Antigua Public Utilities Authority, which is a statutory corporation. So it is using public funds to incentivize investments in that. It is funded also in part by the European Union Digital Connectivity Program. What we're trying to do is to ensure that there are clear regulatory pathways. We're encouraging governments to see this infrastructure as critical infrastructure and therefore support it. For us in the Caribbean, as you know, many of our economies are driven by tourism. So governments are very clear on incentivizing investments in tourism, in hotels and so on. There are 20, 25-year tax incentives, write-offs for investment in hotels. But we're trying to also help our governments to understand that if we want to transition to digital economies, that we also need to incentivize investments in the ICT sector. There are other cable systems in the Caribbean that connect a number of islands. The Southern Caribbean Fiber, most recently rebranded Deep Blue One, connects about 15 countries. And therefore, that calls for some regulatory harmonization and collaboration amongst the operators and the regulators. So we encourage participation in bodies such as this, in forums such as this. The breakfast meeting was very, very useful this morning in connecting us with a number of stakeholders who can help us to advance these initiatives. So in essence, we want to drive the harmonization. That is why we exist, to drive harmonization of policy and regulation, to promote awareness of the critical nature of this infrastructure if governments are building out digital economies. We worked about 10 years ago with a project called CARSIP, the Caribbean Regional Infrastructure Communications Program, that was funded by the World Bank as well, and that has helped to drive down the cost of connectivity in the region. So that's just a snapshot. I know it's a large panel, so I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary General. What you highlighted describes resilience as regional, not a national challenge. I'm sure the island nations, this is really an economic lifeline, the resilience as a whole. So I would like to shift our conversation to a bit of technology, and I would like to bring in Professor Cabugueira of Anacom. Professor, sensing and monitoring technologies have been promoted by the Portuguese government in the Azores Islands. How are these technologies expected to enhance the resilience of submarine cable systems in the region?
Thank you, and good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to my hometown. So I'm from Porto. It's great to see so many people here, and let me just say that I hope that you'll be able to to spend a couple of hours going around the most beautiful town in Portugal. I'm actually living nowadays on what might be the 5th or the 6th most interesting town in Portugal, which is Lisbon. But please be sure that this is the best place to be when you come to Portugal, for many reasons. One of them is wine, obviously, and the second, for those of you that will be having dinner tonight, try francesinha, which is our local sandwich, and you should try it. It's basic bread with meat and cheese and meat and meat and meat and cheese, with bread, a lot of cheese, and hot sauce. So, francesinha, don't forget this. Okay, so having said this, we are talking about sensorization, so the sensing, it's relevant on this issue. Let me start by sharing with you more or less the same story as was already presented, what is happening now internally in what regards submarine cables. So Portugal is now starting the challenge of renewing the two national submarine cables, the one that connects the mainland to Madeira and Açores. The name is CAM, Continent, Madeira and Açores. It is now being produced and it will be implemented, I believe, during this year. Probably will start the operation at the end of next year or beginning of 27. I already have a very interesting information, is that because that cable will be owned by a public company and it will be managed by a public company. We have been asking over and over again the owner of the current submarine cable, which is incumbent, over and over again what they are going to do with their own cable, and they keep on saying that they are not sure if it will be still able to work. And I just knew that probably during 10 to 20 more years, they will still be there. But anyway, so we have that's the project that is now being implemented, and there will be a second project, which will be the ring, that will connect the islands from Açores. That is still on paper. Both cables will be sensorized, so they will both be smart cables. So they will not only have the internal capacity to produce base data, as we already heard this morning, but they will actually have sensors that will improve the information regarding climates, the monitoring of sea waters, and obviously the possibility of having early warning on situations of tsunamis and earthquakes. A couple of seconds or, well, I don't know, but at least we'll have some early warning. And one of the main objectives is to produce information for scientific purposes. So it will be a cable that will improve our knowledge of our own exclusive economic zone, which is, I believe, one of the biggest in the world. In itself, the cable, having the sensors, will have the capacity to promote its own resilience. Yes, and that is something that has already been said. But it is also relevant to keep in mind that passing through our EEZ, we have more or less 25% of the worldwide cables. So all the cables of the world, 25% of them will pass through our own zone at some point, which means that censoring that zone might be relevant for the overall resilience of 25% of the submarine cables that mostly connect Europe to North America. Some of them obviously going to Africa, but this, I believe, it will be contributing to the resilience of those cables also. Besides that, it is also relevant to talk not only about the resilience of the cables, but the resilience of the economy and society. And as I said, using the cables and the smart capacity of the cables to improve the early warning of natural occurrences will obviously improve our capacity to react to them, which means that we have been discussing yesterday and today about the resilience of the infrastructure, but the resilience of the infrastructure itself will improve our own resilience as a society and the resilience of our economy. One final comment on this internal strategy, which is our objective of creating in Açores related to the cable, or also supporting the cable, what we call a free technological zone, which is sandbox. So it will be a zone to develop drones in boats, lands, and air. So it will be, I believe, that one of the biggest zones to develop drones for submarines and for any sea purpose. And anything related to drones will be related at some point with connectivity. And the possibility of having there the cable and have improved technology or the telecommunication technology, I believe it will be relevant for that also.
Thank you, Professor. So more than technical upgrades, sensing and monitoring are tools really to reduce uncertainties and risk, a lot of information to use in the ecosystem. This brings me back to the financial perspective, how decisions really impact resilience, especially in underserved regions. My next question is to Mr.Syed Jawaid of the Islamic Development Bank. The Islamic Development Bank has financed several submarine cable projects in markets that could be described as underserved or more challenging from an economic or risk perspective. Could you share one or two examples of specific submarine cable projects the bank has supported and explain how it approaches investment decision in this sector? Mr. Jawaid.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, on behalf of the Islamic Development Bank, I would like to thank Anacom, ITU, and the organizers for inviting the Islamic Development Bank to this important forum. Secondly, of course, in terms of the approach that we take to submarine cables, is that we don't classify submarine cables as isolated digital assets. What we classify them as transformative cornerstone for national economy, and our approach for approaching such kind of digital infrastructure initiatives is derived by the digital inclusion operational strategy of the bank, which basically prioritizes transformative and scalable infrastructure. For those who are not aware of the Islamic Development Bank, we are an institution that operates very similar to the World Bank, and we are operating in 57 member states, and last year we celebrated our 50th anniversary, so this shows our resilience as well. And in terms of the development MDB community, we are the only institution which operates on a South-South cooperation model, so every beneficiary of the bank is a shareholder of the bank. Coming back to the topic, our approach in terms of financing is not only coming up with the capital, but what we do promote is an approach called Finance Plus, which basically combines capital with the technical expertise and the knowledge on structuring the project in such a way that it makes investment ready for potential investors to come in, and be it local or foreign investments. Now, a couple of examples that what we have done in the past, starting with our project that we did in Bangladesh. In 2015, Bangladesh had a single point of failure with only one submarine cable system, which if had some sort of disruptions, they would have to rely on expensive satellite communications to do their normal day-to-day business. So what we came up with was not only to provide redundancy, but also we wanted to capitalize on the future-proofing where digital foreign direct investments would come in later on. So what we did was we provided with a second submarine cable. Not only that, we increased the capacity by 6 times. So this was more on increasing the capacity and bringing in redundancy and doing future-proofing in the case of Bangladesh. Second example that I would like to share is that we not only provided one submarine cable, but we provided financing for 2 submarine cable projects in East Africa, in Djibouti. People who are aware of East Africa, and especially Djibouti, it's a population of about over 1 million people. So the objective or the rationale for us to support this kind of 2 submarine cables was not the downstream utilization of the capacity, but it was more on the business case that it would provide these additional capacity to its neighboring countries. So this allowed them to get this revenue for more economic activities in the country. by itself. So these are the two submarine cable projects examples that we have done. We have, of course, several other digital infrastructure projects that we have done in West Africa, and happy to share even further during the next of the course. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jawaid. So the examples if you give showed that beyond the demand, you need a very structured approach, risk and sharing risk across stakeholders. Still on finance, I would like to move on to Ms. Bienek of the ITU. Building on this morning's investment breakfast, what were the key takeaways regarding the pipeline of bankable digital infrastructure projects, and what critical gaps must be addressed to move from dialogue to tangible financial closures?
Great, thank you. We had a wonderful investment breakfast session this morning. Thanks to all of you who were there. It was probably many of you because it was a very packed room. So thanks for bearing with us and participating in the conversation. One thing that ITU's Deputy Secretary General said that I'm going to borrow from is investment's not just about the funding, but also about the coordination and collaboration. And I think this morning was a strong representation of what we can do together when we collaborate, when we coordinate, when we bring together different regions and different countries to share diverse perspectives and experiences and think about how we can replicate successful models potentially elsewhere. So I wanted to share 4 takeaways that I came away with after this morning. The first is perhaps unsurprising. I think it's the very common takeaway and message we hear from a lot of the work we're doing on digital infrastructure investments: blended finance, innovative finance, partnerships. And mixed in with that is a lot of discussion about de-risking, collaborating and blending public and private funding together, ensuring there's demand and offtake. And that's not surprising because those, of course, are the innovative models we need if we're going to talk about connecting traditionally underserved markets that potentially are less economically viable. But I think what was really valuable about this morning was the ability to go beyond those high-level key takeaways of we need more funding and we need to blend it and we need to de-risk it. Is, okay, where can we do that? How can we do that? Let's have some tangible discussions about where there's real opportunities and real project pipeline to move forward, and having the right stakeholders in the room willing to have those conversations. Finance providers, country governments, project sponsors and developers, operators. So that leads me to my second key takeaway is on the projects. I think you asked specifically about the pipeline, have very fruitful discussions around specific projects, as Rodney mentioned, maybe some opportunities in the Caribbean coming out of our small island developing states table. So great examples from the Pacific, some great leads and opportunities in the Caribbean to follow up on going forward. But other regional opportunities for collaboration within Asia, within Africa, and the idea of having countries together go in on a collaboration or consortium to potentially make a single project more bankable or viable if you have multiple markets going in together. The third takeaway was on deploying new infrastructure and how we do that, as well as how we think about existing infrastructure. So on new infrastructure, opening up markets, advancing competition, not just with subsea cables, but across the digital value chain, so that we can think about cross-cutting interventions and investments can really flow because the entire market is open, competitive, and we have open access infrastructure in place, as Herman already spoke to. And on existing infrastructure, Rodney again discussed the potential opportunity to explore existing assets and extending the technical life of subsea cables that might be available, an open question, something that perhaps more feasibility work is needed on. But even further onshore as well is trying to tap into currently underutilized cross-border links and other terrestrial fiber that might be used to further expand connectivity into currently underserved areas. And finally, and not at all surprising given the topic of the summit, the theme around repairs as well. And when we think about financing, the need to think about repairs and maintenance up front, even when a financial agreement's made and no infrastructure has been laid yet, already planning ahead for those repairs. And some interesting discussion around how development finance institutions can be thinking about that when a financing deal is being made, setting aside funding upfront for the maintenance and repairs, and even having tenders and other mechanisms in place upfront so that maintenance is already planned for in the future.
Thank you, Ms. Bianek. So investment goes beyond funding, require collaboration and coordination, partnerships with the right stakeholders across different boundaries. You talked about financing repairs by the NBs, which is really critical in our discussion. So I'll return to the World Bank now with the second round of questions. Mr. Cufré, cable projects can be commercially challenging, particularly in smaller or less developed markets. What instruments and approaches does the World Bank Group utilize to help bridge the viability gap? And what other partners and stakeholders might be enlisted to assist with funding and implementation?
So, I mean, there's a lot to cover on that topic, but I would like you to take three main messages. One is that there is no one size fits all. There is not a single way to approach this type of investments. It's really a creative process and a structural and a financial engineering one from a financing perspective, no? So I mentioned, for those of you that joined the breakfast this morning, we mentioned an example where we had to finance a branching unit of Equiano into a West African country. The numbers didn't add up. There was no economic case. What we ended up doing to make the numbers work was a combination of government contributions. They ended up being a 30% owner of the cable, an operator, private sector wholesale open access operator that invested 30% as well, and IFC also investing through a blended finance instrument, 30%. So this was, and I made a comment earlier this morning about share pain, share gain type of approach. The second point, but I'll use the example that I mentioned just now, is that the government also contributed very valuable rights of way, access to certain infrastructure, including the landing station, and also OPGW, so the ability to deploy new fiber over transmission line and existing fiber assets that the government had. So all of this made the bankability and the break-even point much more achievable, and this is how the investment took place. The other example I mentioned briefly is really when on consortium type engagements where IFC supported the largest wholesale open access minority ownership on that cable to allow wholesale open access. So these are very diverse ways to address the need for additional submarine capacity. And what I encourage, like I did this morning, is really please reach out to the Digital Infrastructure Catalyzer team that has representatives probably from all of these people that you see on stage, and we can help identify what is the right way to fund this infrastructure in your particular case. The second comment that I would like to make is that the government can play a crucial role in making this happen. This is not just about securing financing, it's not just about the private sector, but the government has unique tools in terms of, one, making assets available, like I mentioned earlier, two, reducing red tape, streamlining policies, and so on. All of this make for a faster decision making and hence more efficient deployments and has improved the returns on investment. The final point that I'd like to make is that one of the things that we're exploring within the World Bank Group is going from one-offs investments, like I just mentioned, to more programmatic investments. And there are two initiatives that we're in the process of exploring and will be launched this year. One is a digital access fund, which basically is intended to support different tiers of investors for greenfield equity on borderline bankable projects. And the way that it would work is that we will mobilize the World Bank Group and blended finance and donors will mobilize the first loss of those investments. And by guaranteeing that at the most you will not lose money, we will crowd in private sector. So certain stakeholders will take a disproportionate amount of risk to ensure that the private sector, we can crowd in the private sector to support their mandate, which is to make money, right? So this digital access fund is in the works. We think it has potential. The other initiative that we're exploring is a yieldco model, which is once you have established submarine cables, their capacity is fully utilized, you can actually sell the submarine cables to investors that have this need for stable cash returns with lower return expectations, like pension funds, right? So by being able to sell a submarine cable altogether with its cash flows, you can have this money being recycled into new connectivity initiatives. This is a lot used by real estate investment trust. We are exploring it for discrete terrestrial fiber. We're exploring it for data centers, and we think it would make sense for submarine cables as well. So stay tuned.
Thank you, Mr. Cufré. No silver bullet for project finance, you mentioned. Developed finance can only go so far on its own. You require government contribution in many areas. I think this brings me to the question of what governments themselves are doing to reduce the risk associated with such kind of matter and then attract long-term capital. So I would like to now turn my question to the government of India. Mr. Palai, India is experiencing a new wave of data center investments that will require robust submarine cable connectivity. How is the Indian government ensuring that these investments are supported by resilient and secure submarine cable infrastructure?
Thank you. It's a very tricky question because first of all, we have to see the landscape of data center, particularly with the invent of that AI-driven data centers. So if you look at the Indian landscape, particularly, it's a peninsula, and we have around 23 submarine cables at 18 landing stations. Whatever the incidentally or without any regulations probably, these data centers are scattered around the landing stations. It's predominantly in western and eastern side of the southeastern side of India, where the connectivity for international gateway is seamless and secured. But if you look at this, that the growth of data center, as you have also mentioned, over the last 5 years, India has seen the growth in terms of around threefold from last 5 years. So it is measured in terms of this megawatt, because 400 odd megawatts. Today in 2025, it is 1.5 gigawatt consumption of data centers. And if this trajectory to be maintained, and with the AI data centers in place, so by 2030, we will be having around 5 gigawatt of data centers total power consumptions. So that makes the non-linear growth. And the tremendous impact will be on the submarine cables, because the moment we are talking about conventional data center to a AI data centers, the consumption patterns or the bandwidth requirement has increased from single-fold to four-fold, roughly. So in that case, the amount of data or the bandwidth required will be fourfold in 2030. And if you're considering that, there will be a lot of the domestic consumptions, but significant portion will be the international. So that through the submarine cable. So there is a huge demand for the need of the additional submarine cables, all the upgradation of the existing old submarine cables. And secondly, the resilience, particularly that recently this government has allowed the domestic submarine cables, which was not there. So this will add to the resilience and security or secured communications. So from that perspective, this lot of that activities the government is looking at very pragmatically, the suggestions by the particularly ICPC, and also the recommendations made in the International Submarine Cable Resilience Summits. So this last the Abuja summit and this Portugal summit will help in a much way in shaping this. So India is totally open as far as the investment is concerned in the new domains, particularly some additional submarine cable requirement and also domestic submarine cable requirements. There is huge opportunities for investment, and government is taking the multilateral the collaborations for the particularly investment propositions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Palai. You've shown how India's experience with data centers really drives demand, the anchor demand, changes the dynamics of the economics of submarine cables. I would like to now turn to the CTU, Mr. Rodney Taylor. The submarine cable sector has persistent gaps in technical, regulatory, and emergency response capacity. What practical steps can the CTU, in collaboration with industry partners and otherwise, take to build a sustained Caribbean talent pipeline for cable planning, permitting, protection, and restoration?
Thank you again. So as small states, there are capacity gaps, capacity issues, and very often we rely on external resources in terms of permitting, legal frameworks, emergency restoration, and so on. And it is a perennial problem. What we have sought to do in the CTU, part of our mandate is capacity building. And so this is the third year we've established the School of Digital Transformation and Innovation in the Caribbean, working along with international partners. So the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, CAF, CETIC BR, the technical community like ICANN, LACNIC, Internet Society, LAC TLD, Red Clara, and the University of the West Indies, to host this school on digital transformation. And one of the key components is a focus on submarine cables and critical infrastructure. So we focus a lot on that as a component of this capacity building program. And the good thing is that it's just not a case where you're taught in the classroom, but we actually go into the field. It was hosted in Trinidad and Tobago for the last 2 years, and the participants got to go to a landing station. So when we talk about critical infrastructure, they can see, they can get to understand the business a lot more and understand what policy, technical challenges that are being faced by the operators of that cable. And we can seek to broaden that, working along with other partners. We do a lot of work with the United States Telecoms Training Institute. Many of you will be familiar with that organization. And so we can look at, with this greater focus now on this critical infrastructure of submarine cables, looking at broadening, expanding that capacity building program and working with partners. We've also, as you know, sought to collaborate. We can call it South-South cooperation, but I visited you in Nigeria just about a year ago. We talked about how we can harmonize our regulatory frameworks, and I'm pleased to say we actually have advanced the implementation of a regional regulatory body based on the WATRA model, but also sharing experiences with each other. South-South cooperation, as I said, it's not just a question of learning, but sharing experiences as to what works and what is maybe best practice. So we'll continue our focus on that, maybe look and see how we can broaden and deepen that sharing, that knowledge and capacity building, so that we come up with good policies and that we're able to support the operators of those cables. We have also exposing our young people. We have a Caribbean ICT youth network, and we're exposing young people not just to policy development, but to technical aspects of the business as well, and that will continue to be a focus. So that it's just not a short-term strategy, but a longer term engagement where down the road we will have the capacity that we need in the Caribbean. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary General. What you outlined is that the capacity gaps are not just skills issues, there are also some risk issues around that. Now, talking about risk, I would like to turn to the regulator to see how they could really, they're shaping incentives to reduce the risk. I would like to now pose my question to Professor Cabugueira. The EU Global Gateway Program provides financial support for projects connecting EU overseas territories, just like the French Guiana and Aruba. How is the European Union ensuring that these investments are underpinned by resilient and secure submarine cable infrastructure?
Well, the Gateway project that is being developed by Europe it's a plan to reinforce the geopolitical positioning of Europe, not only by improving its own telecommunications capacity. It's actually a program that focuses on all backbone networks, so not only telecommunications, but also energy. So the main objective is to reinforce Europe, to make Europe more independent in technological terms and make it more visible throughout the world. And the perspective is to do that while promoting a better connection with other countries. And yes, it is true that it is supported by a number of financial programs that are being used to promote the connections and implementation of infrastructure that will connect Europe with other countries. As we already heard today, there are different rules that are now being implemented at the European level to reinforce the resilience and security of submarine cables. So that's one of the focus that will be used to evaluate investments. But if you allow me, let me look at in more detail to one particular strategy within the European Global Gateway Program, and which is the Portuguese positioning on that. In the Anacom, for many years, a group we have been discussing internally a different perspective on this concept, which is to bring up the concept of within the European Global Gateway, discuss the Atlantic Gateway, and positioning Portugal as the door, the entrance to Europe in that perspective. Former colleagues like Manuel Barros, that is back there, I believe, and Augusto nowadays, we have been presenting this idea in different forums throughout Europe, and because we believe that we are in our own geopolitical position, our own geopolitical position gives us the capacity to act as a hub for submarine cables that come from the United States, and we now have an example of a cable from an hyperscaler that will connect Açores with Bermudas. We discussed that with the delegates from Bermudas yesterday, but also we look forward to the possibility of using the European funds that we heard from today to improve our connection with the South. With African countries, particularly with the Portuguese-speaking African countries, and why not also look at the North and future capacity to reach the Asian hemisphere throughout the poles. But this is to say that the overall infrastructure, being it looked in the perspective of Europe as the global gateway, or in particular our more small objective of creating Atlantic Gateway, I believe that it will improve the overall resilience of the subsea cables throughout the world. And as I said previously, again, the positioning that we have within the Atlantic creates we are a natural hub for connections. By the way, a piece of history, Sandra yesterday said that the first cable that was landed in Açores, it was in the 19th century, I believe it was 1876. One thing that probably you don't know is that during the first days of the First World War, one of the actions was to cut that cable. So someone went there to cut it. So this idea of disrupting submarine cables is not new. People already understood about that, the importance of doing that a long time ago.
Thank you, Professor. Thanks for highlighting the global gateway approach and how it impacts resilience and the role of technology. Let me now go back to the development finance. Mr.Syed for the Islamic Development Bank. My question to you is, from the perspective of a development financier, what do you see the primary bottlenecks when project owners seek funding for new submarine cables? Specifically, is resilience viewed by the market as a value proposition that unlocks capital or merely as a cost burden?
Thank you. I think to answer first part of your question, we as a development practitioner, we don't see there's lack of capital in the market. The issue is probably to those who have already attended the investment breakfast, and coming back to Mr. Herman, who mentioned about risk sharing, profiling, that are probably to us is a main challenge. And if you see the example of the recent financing by the World Bank to Nigeria, there are capital available there for the right opportunities. What we mean by risk profiling, especially for underserved markets, is that we need to consider country, currency, and execution risks. So, and let alone the operational and the long-term revenue model. So what an investor wants is long-term sustainability. In terms of the cable, developers, they think these projects as technical alone, but there are a lot of other environmental, other factors that needs to be catered into the design to make it more feasible. So what do we do on addressing such kind of issues? We take it from two lenses. So one is the demand aggregation. So what we encourage country policymakers and governments who reaches out to us to obtain financing is that, first of all, they need to take the dialogue internally with the telecom providers, with the private cloud providers, with the ISP providers to get together all the demand within the country to make a business case out of it. And that's when potential financiers would come in. The second approach is taking a very proactive approach in risk mitigation. So the earlier risk that I mentioned, how are we making it into the design of the DNA of the project in terms of open access, its resilience, security, fragility? All these aspects are taken at the design level rather than taken as a guarantee once the project design has already been there. So I think these are certain things, what we do and how do we go about it. We provide capacity building to policymakers with our partners like ITU, like UNDP. We have several cases, and through our webinars, in-person workshops. We guide the policymakers to how to make sure that they take all this into account when they're designing new potential projects, especially in submarine cable and other digital infrastructure projects. More recently, you may be hearing the words, sovereign AI solutions. Every government in the country is now moving towards sovereign solutions, that their data is secured within their jurisdictions. So a lot of these things are coming to us in terms of sharing our experience, and we are trying to do that through various ways. So this is what I mentioned earlier as well, that we are providing Finance Plus. So not only we are providing the capital, but we are also educating our member states how to better design their interventions so that not only us, but other local financiers, local private sector investors could come in where we de-risk the overall solution, and then so the project is more investor friendly with off-taker and other kind of opportunities or activities that we could cater into account. Now, coming back to the second part of your question is we don't see resilience as a cost burden, but we rather see as a core value proposition, just for the same reason that I've just elaborated earlier, is that because we are going to make things sovereign, we are making our infrastructure, defining infrastructure into critical infrastructure, and now telecommunication is becoming part of the critical infrastructure, because in an emergency situation, your communication is actually your essential element, in which you've just rightly mentioned, and in the earlier sessions we have already seen what is the role of a foundation of a digital infrastructure, or I would say digital enabling infrastructure that enables other hyperscalers, DFDIs, to flow in to respective countries. So we take it from this approach, and this is how we are educating our member states through our Digital Inclusion Strategic Partnership, where we partner with agencies who have these capacities so that we can educate our member states and then co-design the intervention that anybody could finance. So we don't mandate that we're going to finance, and so it's open for anybody to come in and chip in with their resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jawaid. Properly defining resilience is very crucial to unlocking capital, otherwise it's seen as a cost. Now, still on finance, Ms. Bienek, I would like to still ask you some questions on the investment breakfast this morning. This morning's investment breakfast was hosted as part of the Digital Infrastructure Investment Catalyzer, which the ITU helps to lead. Can you share more about this catalyzer and what it aims to achieve, please?
Great, thanks. So let me first take a quick step back, that the catalyzer actually builds on a body of work we call the Digital Infrastructure Investment Initiative, which was an ITU-led initiative in 2024 together with the Multilateral Development Bank ecosystem to really bring a diverse working group of stakeholders together to help identify and define and calculate the total size of the investment gap for digital infrastructure. So how much financing would be needed to close the digital infrastructure investment gap and bridge the global digital divide by 2030. And we found that it was around $1.6 trillion. And so that white paper came out, that initiative sort of concluded in early 2025, but we wanted to bring those findings into the multilateral ecosystem, into the Multilateral Development Bank and finance ecosystem, and elevate this as a high priority need, one that can address the SDGs, that can accelerate economic growth, one that's critically important and should be on the international agenda. So we brought that initiative and work into the Financing for Development Conference in Sevilla, Spain in June, July of 2025. And we see the catalyzer as the next phase of this digital infrastructure investment work, and a phase that's very action-oriented to take the findings from that first phase and that North Star of that $1.6 trillion investment gap, and now say, how are we going to work together? What are we going to do to unlock this financing that's needed to close that gap? So the Digital Infrastructure Investment Catalyzer is being led by ITU with UNCTAD and with 8 multilateral development banks, including the World Bank, Islamic Development Bank, and Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank is also here today, as well as the African Development Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, and the 2 main European, EIB and EBRD. So we see this as a really robust group working hand in hand. We're in the leadership role as co-leads, helping to organize and help steer the conversation, but it's a much bigger ecosystem of players, and that working group continues. We had about 40 organizations in the first phase. We now are already at 100 in this next phase, so a lot of interest and excitement. And the catalyzer, while announced in Spain and formally endorsed as part of the Sevilla Platform for Action to help implement the outcome document agreed to in Sevilla, it has three main areas of focus that we plan to bring the investment ecosystem, the governments, the private sector together to collaborate on. And that's around the data, tools, and templates needed to accelerate investments. The second is around capacity building, which we've been discussing, not just for policymakers, but also for investors themselves to think about what creative structures we might need and how to implement those going forward. And the third, final, and perhaps most important pillar is around partnerships, funding, and investment. So this morning's investment breakfast is a great example of how we're trying to bring the stakeholders together to have those conversations, make those connections, to try to identify project pipeline and accelerate the investments that are needed.
Thank you, Ms. Bienek, for highlighting this role of the catalyzers in accelerating closing the infrastructure gap. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we will now move on to the last round of questions. which is a common question to all panelists. It will be like a takeaway for this session. After that, we'll now move on to the audience for a few questions to the panelists. So for the common questions, I would like to start with Ms. Bienek. By 2026, what do you consider to be the major challenge in promoting global submarine cable resilience in underserved regions?
Great, thanks. I think by 2026, we need to continue this momentum that's been started here today. And I think a major challenge will be if we don't take forward some of the initial partnership opportunities and projects identified into their next stage. So a huge need by 2026 is going to be to identify the actual hard funding that we need to put behind some of these projects. For example, this morning, some were identified, but they require feasibility funding to move forward. So I think we need to continue this momentum. We need to move forward where we see opportunity and bring those funders in to really put money on the line to advance these projects.
Thank you. Interesting things ahead in 2026. Mr. Jawaid, the same question to you. By 2026, what do you consider to be the major challenge in promoting global submarine cable resilience in underserved regions, from your perspective?
Thank you very much. I think what we understood is probably the submarine cable community is probably not aware that MDBs are actually looking to finance their projects. So the idea would be to how to make those interventions bankable, and we're here to help in terms of our financing, technical assistance, capacity building. We have especially allocated nearly $250 million just for the sake of digital infrastructure investments in our member states for 2026 and 2027. So we look forward to assisting in how we can provide our assistance in developing those programs that ultimately the bank can finance. And we'll be happy to accommodate any request that would come, and you can be part of our webinars. The first webinar would be on 9th of March next month, where we'll be showcasing our example in Saudi Arabia, what Saudi Arabia is doing in terms of their sovereign AI and digital infrastructure. So we are welcome to provide any assistance in that regard as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jawaid. Professor, over to you. By 2026, what do you consider to be the major challenge in promoting global submarine cable resilience in underserved regions?
Let me answer that with my takeaway from these 2 days of learning. And what I learned during the last 2 days is that, yes, the resilience of the cable itself, it's relevant, but maybe we should also look at it in a broader perspective. And I remember, as you all know, as you probably already heard somewhere, in Europe, we like to regulate a little bit. So we produce a little bit of regulation in Brussels. But sometimes, actually, new regulation that comes out from Brussels is really interesting. And one thing that happened in 2024 was the publications of the directive for critical entities. And what I like about that is the fact that we are no longer calling it critical infrastructure, we are calling it critical entities, in the sense that we understand that the critical aspect is not only the infrastructure, it's the infrastructure and the people, the organizations, the institutions. And what I've learned during the last 2 days, and I believe it will be a good challenge to look during next years, is that the resilience of the submarine cables, it's something that we have to look at having a holistic view of the complete infrastructure, but at the same time, we have to look at the institutions that are implementing and promoting resilience. We have to look at the the firms that are actually building and implement and landing the cables, and even the people that fish around the cable, so that somehow use the same space that the cables. So having this broader perspective of the resilience of complete entities that are around the submarine cables is something that I learned during the last 2 days.
Thank you, Professor. Over to you, Secretary General.
Sure, and thanks again for this opportunity. One of the challenges for us, we talk about the Caribbean, but the reality is that there's still some divisions within there. So the Eastern Caribbean states, there's a Caribbean community, I mentioned that our member states go as far as Central America, South America. And for us, if you look at the population, can go all the way up to about 45 million people, a market of 45 million. That becomes more attractive as we work together in terms of investment. While we talk about building universal and meaningful connectivity, at the end of the day, these are businesses we're talking about, and you have to consider return on investment. And therefore, our challenge would be to work more cohesively together. It isn't a single market. It isn't the United States or the Caribbean. But if we are able to promote harmonization, we're able to go to the table collectively, make it easier to invest, understand that we're building resilient networks, that we should be able to communicate with each other. If there's a disruption at a transit point in Miami, it should not shut our digital services down, but we should be able to build more resilient networks by taking a more strategic approach, working together and ensuring that these cables are deployed in a much more resilient manner. So our challenge will be to move beyond the talk of collaboration, to actually work together, to sit at the table together and offer a much more attractive investment environment for investors who build these cables. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary General. I'll now turn to the government in India. Mr. Palai, can you give your response to this question?
Well, say, to summarize particularly what are the challenges and for this 2026 and beyond, say problem statement is itself is very challenging to answer also. One side, when we are talking about the growth trajectory and demand for the new submarine cables, the submarine cables will ultimately land at the points where the submarine cable landing stations are there. And paradoxically, in Indian Peninsula, that's similar, same sort. They are going to be landing where the shipping and anchoring activities are predominant. And there are also that the marshy lands, means particularly the low height or low depth seas available. So these are creating a major challenge as far as the redundancy is concerned and the resilience, because the probability of getting the submarine cable fault is quite high. Secondly, we are just talking about some of the few that pain points, some of the cables taken in the Red Sea areas where the international bandwidth from India passes. So it took nearly 6 months, actually, if I think people may share with this still that cables are not repaired. So given this context, we have to create a redundancy framework, not the resilience, not the redundancy framework to pass through the alternate bandwidth to the different cables. Third, this submarine cable repair ecosystems is not readily available. And particularly in Indian context, this repair mechanism or the repair resources are not available. This is posing one of the critical the points where we have to think that this whether the country will have to sponsor for the development of these capabilities, or it's a market-driven mechanism. So when the market-driven mechanism doesn't work, so obviously that country will have to pitch in for its sovereign rights to have that the cable restored, because geopolitically it's also quite sensitive. Indian Ocean region is also geopolitically sensitive. So these are the challenges what I find. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And finally, to Mr. Cufré of World Bank, what's your take on by 2026?
So I think we have a very difficult years ahead. On the one hand, we all make a case for blended finance, and blended finance funding is drying up, right? In the sense that money is money at risk that some countries are willing to contribute towards the greater good, and those, unfortunately, we're all becoming a little bit more selfish, even the geopolitics of the world and so on. So looking after our own interests rather than looking for us as a planet as a whole. So blended finance is drying up. AI, just data requirements and AI are putting enormous pressure on submarine connectivity, on data centers, and so on. And so they have a combination of exponential demand and drying up funds, and this creates a particularly difficult situation for the poorest markets, which is where the World Bank operates and wants to support. The geopolitics are not helping, and I don't see kind of anything's improving in the short term. So it's a macro. My concern is more on the macro side than on the dynamics of the sector itself. I mean, the good news, just to end up this panel on a positive note, another bummer that I just shared, is that the World Bank thrives on this type of situations. We were created on the back of the Second World War, the Marshall Plan and the reconstruction of Europe. So we see ourselves as playing a counter-cyclical role in terms of supporting and making our funding available in these difficult times. And we're open for business. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, panelists. I'll now move to the audience for a few questions. Okay, I think we have a microphone. Okay, I think you could.
Thank you very much. Okay, my name is Nomsa. I'd like to thank the panelists. It's been an eye-opening session. I think in a lot of these conversations, knowing fully that we have a very high barrier to entry for the development of such critical infrastructure, we don't normally have these kinds of conversations and with the people that we're seeing up front. With that said, I'm happy to hear about the non-traditional funding models. So you spoke of Finance Plus. So DFIs are going beyond the norm, which is great and interesting, and I think it's very beneficial. I think that's sharing risk, which is going beyond just saying to yourselves, we'll look at the EBITDA, the rate of return, and we'll meet you at the return dates for funding to return back. My question is on underserved markets and regions, and this sometimes even includes developed nations that have underserved pockets within their nations. Underserved markets are plagued with a lot of infrastructural deficits, and when that happens, we are happy to talk about developing subsea cables and focusing on that. I'm just wondering, so my question is actually to World Bank and to you, Sir Mohammad. Are DFIs looking at models in which you look at multifaceted project funding? What I mean by this is, in the SPV that you spoke of, would it be something you would consider throwing in electricity infrastructure providers in there? For example, where you say in building the backhaul for your subsea cable, then a infrastructure provider that works on electricity comes into the SPV, and what then happens is you could build an aerial cable which or with poles that are able to sustain high voltage electricity. In so doing, we are unlocking an ecosystem. At the end of the day, we're looking at the eyeball network. We're looking at issues such as affordability, availability, relevance, accessibility, and those are the eyeball network is the one that actually in the back end funds the return for that investment. So just a question, have you been looking into something like that, or are you currently open to adding that piece into your models? Thank you.
Thank you. Question to the NDBs. Would you want to, okay? Who goes first? Okay.
I'm happy to go first.
Right.
So for many years, every single investment that the IFC does on any network type asset needs to have embedded fiber. So if you think of roads, if you think of gas pipelines, if you think of high power transmission lines, any investment that the IFC does needs to have fiber deployed alongside it, precisely for the reason that you mentioned. Now, what you're suggesting is not thinking only about the asset, but thinking about a solution, right? And when you think about rural connectivity, and in Africa, let's say, it's not just about getting fiber or a tower there. It's about getting the energy and making devices affordable so that people can access it, and making data affordable, and having people trained and skilled on how to use these devices. And I manage access and affordability. So to give you a sense of how we're shifting towards solutions types rather than just network investment. So indeed, it is at the very core of what we're doing, and I'll just kind of a bit of advertising. We launched 2 years ago, President Banga, the M300 initiative, which aims to connect 300 million Africans by 2030, and it does so based on this type of engagements, which have to do with combining digital bottlenecks, addressing digital bottlenecks with energy bottlenecks at the same time.
Jawaid, please
Sure.
go ahead.
So I think for us, at ISDB, we when we are talking about digital, by default, there's hidden energy behind it, because if there's no power, there's no digital for us. I'll give you a quick 2 examples. We are now partnering with ITU for a smart village program in Pakistan. What we're doing there, so we are providing Wi-Fi devices in rural villages, which is basically providing internet, and then it's powered by solar. And what we're doing is we're not only providing internet connectivity, but we're providing meaningful connectivity with connecting local public schools for girls to provide e-education, and also provide e-health services through doctors sitting in the city to provide medical consultations for a trained nurse in a rural village. Another example is that what we are doing in partnership with UNDP in Indonesia is we are embedding, in Indonesia, there is a consultation process for village planning. So what we are calling is we are using AI for inclusive village development. So what we're doing is we're providing solar-powered, digital connectivity within villages, where they would collect data and they would collect the requirements for infrastructure planning like road, healthcare, education, and that would be included, and AI would do a prediction in terms of based on the actual citizens' data for a 5-year planning. So this is what we are doing it in Indonesia, where we are doing it in selected villages. The idea is to scale it in the future. So these are certain examples that we embed energy with ICT in terms of wherever we are going for scalable solutions, especially in the underserved areas that we do. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jawaid. I'm sorry, we're going to have just one question. Told we have run out of time. So I would like to thank the distinguished panelists, the World Bank Group, Government India, CTU, Anacom, Islamic Development Bank, and the ITU for this robust discussion. We had insights into India's policy reforms, Caribbean's regional coordination, the innovative financing models of the MDBs, and of course, insights from ITU. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, audience, for this engagement. Have a very good evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all. You can take your seat.